Hi, I'm Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to welcome back to our program and the Contrarian platform, Abigail Spanberger. As many of you know, she was a congresswoman for several terms from the great state of Commonwealth, excuse me, of Virginia, from which I used to live. I met her way back when she was still a freshman, and in fact was seeking office at the time. Former CIA agent. She is really a phenomenal fighter for the causes that contrarians care about, and she is now running for governor of the Commonwealth. Welcome, Abigail. So nice to see you again.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
So let's talk about the damage that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing. When I last interviewed you, it was kind of prospective about the kind of damage that could be done. Now that we've seen them cutting off spending, laying off thousands of people, what has that been like for the people of Virginia, where so many government workers and really also people who enjoy the benefits of government obviously live?
So, everywhere I go across the Commonwealth, I hear about the impacts, not just of the federal firings that have occurred so far, but the continued threat of firings across our Commonwealth. Virginia is home to more than 320,000 full-time federal employees, and the impacts are dire. It's not just federal employees who are bringing the concerns that they have to me. It is the entirety of the economy. It's small business owners, it's restaurant owners, it's dry cleaners. What we are seeing is already detrimental, but the fear and the concern and the really lack of information about what comes next is so consequential.
And let's take something that we normally wouldn't think of, perhaps, but let's say that they go forward, for example, with even worse cuts in Medicaid. Explain to us the impact it has not only on poor people, people associate that with Medicaid, but on rural America, rural hospitals, which I know has been an issue that you've been extremely involved in.
So there's a couple different ways that the impact of cuts to Medicaid would impact, and of course I'm running for governor of Virginia, so I'll use Virginia as an example, but presumably across the country it would be the same story. So Virginia somewhat recently put Medicaid expansion in place. So first and foremost, if we were to see cuts to the federal share of Medicaid expansion go down, Virginia has a trigger law in place, and we would lose Medicaid expansion. Right there, that's hundreds of thousands of Virginians who today can go to the doctor with Medicaid coverage, who the next day would not be able to. In addition, so many of our rural communities are facing real dire challenges of the medical workforce leaving, nurses, doctors. Rural hospital infrastructure is one that is always under threat. And, here in the Commonwealth, we credit Medicaid expansion as being one of the reasons why we have been able to save some of our rural hospitals that were on a downward trajectory, that were, potentially otherwise at risk of closures. So decreases to Medicaid would mean potential for closures of hospitals. Certainly, it would mean that folks can't, won't have that coverage, would lose that coverage. Medicaid expansion would go away. And then the larger impact of that, right? So someone who, the day before these cuts would have had, or, someone who has Medicaid coverage is currently able to go and get the preventative health care. They think their child has an ear infection. They think that they might have the flu. They can go to the doctor, they can be seen, and that is covered. In the event that Medicaid is drastically decreased, that Medicaid expansion goes away, suddenly those folks are waiting till it's an exigent, urgent circumstance. Presumably, when it is so dire, they go to the emergency room. That impact ends up impacting the rest of the community, because now we have someone who doesn't have any insurance coverage, has no health care, has walked into an emergency room under a law put in place by Ronald Reagan and Tala. They're going to get the life stabilizing care. But when you walk into an emergency room with horrible pneumonia because you didn't get the care you needed when you first got ill, that expense is that much higher, right? So somewhere along the line, we will see that expense come home, whether it's rising insurance rate for those who have private insurers, whether it's the dire and sad consequences to individuals. And overall, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we understand the value of not just Medicaid, but Medicaid expansion. And so then there's going to be major impacts potentially on Virginia's budget as the Commonwealth endeavors to try and figure out how to make up for the loss that is coming because of this just sort of catastrophic wrecking ball that's running through the administration in DC.
There's another area that the Musk-Trump administration is going after, and that's the Department of Education, which does everything from school lunches to making sure that kids with disabilities get a proper plan. What does it look like in the schools in Virginia, which frankly hadn't, like most schools in America, even caught up with the gap that was caused by COVID? What is that impact on teachers, students, parents?
Well, and when you talk about the gap that was created by COVID, here's a shocking statistic. Virginia is 51st, the last out of all states and Washington, D.C., 51st in our math recovery. That is, as a parent of three kids in Virginia public schools, that is a shocking number. And those numbers include public and private schools, importantly. And so we already know that we have a lot of ground to make up, that we have to turn our attention towards our public education system, towards our education priorities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But in the event that we see in the event that the assault on the Department of Education gets uh, even worse, if that can be imagined, the impact on Virginia hits us in a variety of different ways. And again, this is specific to Virginia, but it's true everywhere in the country. So right now, we're going to see if you cut the workforce so substantially, we're going to see changes in the way the Department of Education actually functions. That will hurt public schools across the country. If we see major slashing to funding, and we see that dollars that typically would be under normal circumstances be flowing to our high need schools, if those dollars get cut, that is catastrophic, particularly for our rural communities. That's the case in Virginia. When you look mapped out where those Department of Education dollars really are so impactful, it's in our rural agricultural communities, where they're just the population isn't big enough to balance out, to bring additional dollars in. Now, to be very clear, schools across the entirety of Virginia, suburban, urban, rural, they would all suffer. But for those larger localities, they might be able to, rob Peter to pay Paul. Smaller communities that can't do that would suffer across the board, instead of making those terrible choices that might allow them to stabilize slightly at the expense of something else, admittedly, but stabilize slightly their public education system. So it is catastrophic. It is detrimental. And the thing that I just fundamentally don't understand in terms of what this Trump administration is doing is I do not understand how anyone is is blind to the fact that our education system is the pipeline towards our workforce. It's the pipeline towards our innovation. Business success in the next generation. And when I'm traveling across Virginia now as a candidate for governor, but previously when I would travel anywhere across my district, I would hear from employers, small, medium, and large, that they were having challenges with workforce, that they needed a better prepared workforce. They needed more potential workforce. They needed this, they needed that. And the idea that particularly when, in Virginia and elsewhere, we're making really important strides forward in the types of career and technical training that prepare people for, directly for to head into careers, that while we're making those strides forward, and there's still much more to be doing, that we would just like leave off some of these successes, that we would just, put a dagger through the heart of education over across the country. Like the economic damage that we are potentially doing to ourselves as a nation is just unthinkable. And so I'm hoping beyond hope that when communities like those in Virginia that are so impacted, if there is it, a major stoppage of federal funding to education, that just as it's so many of our rural and agricultural communities here in Virginia, one, I hope that their members of Congress will stand up and advocate for the needs of their communities. Certainly, as a candidate for governor, I'm endeavoring to do so. But similar communities, this is the same on the Medicaid question, similar communities across the country that frankly do vote more aligned with President Trump. So many communities that, in fact, President Trump won, that I do hope that we might be able to put a stop to this madness, because it is going to hurt the long-term economic prosperity, not just of individuals, not just of kids, but of our country overall.
Right. Speaking of self-inflicted wounds, we now are in a tariff war with Canada and Mexico, not to mention China. You represented a number of agricultural areas in the 7th District, and obviously Virginia has a lot of agriculture. What are you hearing from the farm community and also from manufacturers, frankly, who sell things to Canada or need to buy things from Canada as part of their businesses? What are you hearing?
So, for those who may not be aware, Virginia, our number one private industry is agriculture, and the number one importer of Virginia agricultural products is Canada. And so the impact of what is occurring at the national level, the impact of creating and starting a trade war, certainly we're talking about Canada, but I would say whether it be with Mexico or increasing the trade war with China, all of it is hurting Virginia. And just as an example, back when President Trump started a trade war with China over soybeans, the impact was consequential and dire for soybean growers across Virginia and across the country. And the way that we dealt with that as a country was ended up doing essentially bailout payments, which still continue to be in place today. So we are spending billions of dollars to it's not even to make whole, right? But billions of dollars to provide support to the very same producers who are being impacted by a trade war of our own starting, right? And in the years since that first trade war was started, like we've just lost markets. And so we've created a circumstance where billions of federal dollars will need to continue to flow to those producers, because not only did we start a trade war, did President Trump start a trade war, but he has created a cycle where we have lost market share. And those who would have otherwise purchased from the United States are going to South America. They're going to Brazil. And so they have built up at our expense their markets. And it is federal dollars that continue to provide support to the growers who are so impacted. And so, with what the president is doing right now and antagonizing our neighbors to the north, it's not good from our national security perspective. It's not good from an economic perspective. And particularly for Virginia agriculture, where so many of our farmers and producers are smaller family farms. It's not founded in any sort of long-term plan.
Right.
In addition to the fact that there are neighbors to the north and have been partners in so many things to create a circumstance where, now you've got Canadians. I can't even
Yes.
speak it. The Canadians are
Yes.
so mad at us.
Yes, exactly. So I'm sure your potential Republican opponent is just up in arms in this and is very sympathetic, trying to help the laid off workers, trying to appeal to President Trump, right?
You would
No.
think that if you are the lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia running for governor of Virginia, that you might want to say, hey, these tariffs are bad. No, my opponent says no comment, don't want to talk about tariffs. You would think that if you wanted to be the governor of hundreds of thousands of federal employees, people who devote themselves to the service and the mission of serving their country as NIH researchers, as federal agents, as scientists, as engineers, as lawyers, as specialists, delivering healthcare to veterans. The list goes on and on. That if you want to be the governor to those folks, that you would stand up for their jobs. Indeed, that's not been the case with my opponent. In fact, she has said that, in the past, she's lived paycheck to paycheck. She knows what it is, and they'll get through it. So I'm sure while they appreciate the pep talk, they don't appreciate the fact that not only is she not paying any attention to the loss of their livelihood and the loss of their expertise that was brought to bear to support their fellow Americans, but that she's not paying attention to the impact on the larger economy of the Commonwealth. The University of Virginia, about a week and a half ago, put out a study that said a 10% decrease in Virginia's public or federal workforce would equate to an estimated $6 billion in lost economic output for Virginia. How can you be the champion of the Commonwealth when you are, happily cheering on the potential loss of $6 billion in economic output? Separate and apart from the actual turmoil created in people's lives as they lose their jobs.
So as we reach the end of our time, I want to talk about the economy writ large. Donald Trump was going to lower the price of eggs. He seemed to think the economy was in the doldrums and he was going to bring back manufacturing. Put aside for a moment, manufacturing had already come back like gangbusters under President Biden. We are now talking about a recession or stagflation. What are you hearing in terms of businesses, employers? There's great uncertainty, and if they dare look at their 401k plan, it's probably taken an absolute beating. So what are you hearing in terms of economic anxiety and a desire to get back on track, which was a recovery under President Biden?
Yeah. I'm just going to go straight back to the brass tacks of the eggs prices, right? Like eggs are about $6 a dozen, right? I was just reading somewhere there was a consolidated all of the different ways that you can replace eggs in different recipes, because even just spending 2 eggs to do a box birthday cake is prohibitively expensive for some people, right? I mean, the reality, of course, with the egg prices is it relates back to avian flu, the bird influenza, but is the administration endeavoring to make sure that we're not having to cull like flocks of birds across the country? No, that's not how they're addressing it. Are they contending with the very reality that, in fact, when you put tariffs on Canada, which is where we import our potash from, which is fertilizer used by farmers, certainly across Virginia, but across the rest of the country, that we should expect that whatever they are growing, once those input costs go up, we'll see those prices go up whenever it is that we're at the grocery store into the future, right? The circumstances of our economy are trending in a difficult direction. And to have a president who literally campaigned on, I'm going to just lower costs, I'm going to bring down egg prices, right? Now, arguably, there were many of us saying, how? But not only is he not even making false promises anymore, he is not attempting in the slightest to address the issue. And in fact, is acting as though we didn't have conversation after conversation about egg prices and food prices and costs. And is just saying, yep, there could be, like, acknowledging that there might be a recession on the future on the horizon.
Well,
It
in
is
all fairness,
dire.
he has turned the White House lawn into a Tesla dealership. So there's always that for us to look forward to. Thank you so much for your time, Abigail. Our viewers, our listeners, our whole community always want to know what they can do. And we keep reminding them there are elections this year in Virginia, not only yours, but other statewide races, state legislatures. People can volunteer, people can sign up to phone bank, even if you live in a different state. So step by step, it's one foot in front of the other. We had a disappointment this week, obviously, in the Senate. We're going to have other opportunities to make up ground in Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Virginia. So best of luck. We're going to look forward to having you back soon. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. If anybody wants to volunteer, you can sign up at abigailspanberger.com. It's going to be exciting. We got 3 statewide races in Virginia this year and 100 House of Delegates seats on the ballot. It's us in New Jersey for the statewide races, and we intend to win and make a good showing of it. But Jen, as always, thank you. So good to talk to you.